South Korea is one of the few countries worldwide that boasts a nationwide system for food waste management, with 98% of such waste turned into feed, compost, or energy. Now, this is according to an American daily, the latest foreign media coverage of Korea's campaign against food waste. We have details up next. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Issues and Insiders for this Wednesday, August 21st here in Korea. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we delve into the attention that Korea's food waste recycling campaign has been garnering in recent times. For this, I have Kwon Soa in the studio with me. Soa, welcome back.
Hello, Sunny.
I also have Nicolas Rocca, a journalist for French radio broadcaster RFI, live on the line. Nicolas, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
Right, so let's begin with details first about the latest foreign media coverage about South Korea's recycling of its food waste.
Right, the Washington Post earlier this month released an extensive coverage on how South Korea deals with food waste. It's titled, "South Korea Recycles 98% of its food waste. What can it teach the world?" So let's start with that dramatic figure, 98%. That, according to the report that cited South Korea's Ministry of Environment, is the percentage of food waste in the country that is turned into feed, compost, or energy. And how is this possible? Through the works at some 300 facilities that recycle almost all of 15,000 tons of daily food waste. That is then composted into fertilizer, fed to livestock, or made into biogas, a type of renewable energy. Thanks to the food waste treatment centers, food leftovers in Korea do not end up in the ground anymore, which not only pollutes the soil but releases methane. And it's not always been that way, though. 2 decades ago, 98% of food waste was discarded here in Korea. Geographic and demographic issues were what stopped the digging of new landfills and led to the change in the country's food disposal system. This inevitably also meant change for the individual people. Recycling of food waste has become a norm, which may have come with some resistance at first, but now citizens have not only gotten used to differentiating between what goes into the food waste bin or not. For example, eggshells, bones are a no, but they even face the reality of getting fined for throwing away food into regular trash, or they even have to pay for their own food waste. Electronic waste bins have appeared in recent years that charge residents on the weight of food waste. And we have those at my apartment as well. And I have to say I was a little annoyed at first, but now I think it's a great idea, and that I think even helps in ultimately reducing food waste in the first place. Now, restaurants, meanwhile, use special government-authorized trash bags for food disposal. And speaking of restaurants, it's not uncommon to see restaurant owners fine their customers for leaving leftovers or side dishes on their plates, or the Korean banchan. But, you know, they are mostly for free in Korea. That is why they do lead to more leftovers in some cases.
Right. Nicolas, I believe French news network France 24 also covered Korea's food waste recycling earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken. What was the gist of that particular coverage?
Well, I think it's the coverage that we all wanted to do in a way. It's just, in a way, following the food waste. Where does it start from? Starting from, you know, just a Korean grandmother. How does she recycle it? How does she make the differences? That's so I explained pretty well. I think for us, when we come into this country, it's quite a shock to see how different it is. So my colleagues of France 24 first visited, this person's home, then went to see the recycling facilities, so how restaurants are treating food waste, and just overall try to explain to the people the recipe of Korea's success in that field, knowing that it was in 1995, if I'm correct, only 2% of food waste were recycled in the country. Most of it were buried in the ground, and now we've seen this dramatic change in such a short amount of time. So the idea was, what are the keys to Korean success in that matter? How did Korea make those dramatic change? Of course, there were the investments in the in the important facility, more than 300, if I'm correct, around the country. But there's also, as So explained, the behavior of the people that is a game changer. I felt that in Korea, and the report of France 24 shows it, there's this knowledge about what goes into the recycling bin or not, what should we do, and also the citizens are concerned because, as So explained, people pay for it. So yeah, I think the coverage was kind of introduction of the how Korea does it, and maybe what we should collectively do better in that field.
Right. And staying with foreign media coverage, so like I mentioned earlier, Korea's food waste recycling campaign, it's been making headlines for quite a while. It's a 20-year program, if I'm not mistaken. And that being said, could you perhaps chronicle the related coverage for us over the years?
Right. Multiple global media outlets have been introducing Korea's proactive approach and successful results in handling food waste. And to be honest, I didn't know that we were doing such a good job, and many other countries are not. But that seems to be the case seen in the global coverage. Now, first off, the New York Times last year in June had an article that said how South Korea puts its food scraps to good use, mentioning how the Korean food waste system has been studied by governments around the world, with officials from China and Denmark having toured the country's facilities. New York City, it says, has been observing the system for years as well. The NYT also notes that despite similar programs existing in a number of places, quote, few, if any, other countries do what South Korea does on a national scale. Now, also in the same year, the U.S.'s Good News Network hailed Korea's system as, quote, the world's most sophisticated food waste disposal infrastructure. And Italy's TGCOM24 in June 2023 assessed Korea's food waste system as successful and a sustainable method, adding the system can be looked forward to set a trend worldwide. Also in the same year, India's Financial Express cited experts that believe despite the burden of some $600 million that South Korea has to take annually to run its food waste program, the system has to be benchmarked by other countries. Meanwhile, a year before, The Guardian in 2022 had an article titled, South Korea has almost zero food waste. Here's what the U.S. can learn. And just like the recent Washington Post article that I mentioned, it's difficult to adopt Korea's system in a huge country like the U.S., but the article suggests the South Korean model, quote, illustrates some of the core principles that might guide the process. And I want to end with the World Economic Forum that in 2019 mentioned South Korea only recycled 2% of its food waste. Now it recycles 95%. 95 because this was back in 2019, so not at 98%, I guess. And the WEF also highlighted South Korea's technology behind this system.
Right. And so for the sake of some comparison, could you tell us a bit more about the tackling of food waste beyond Korea's borders?
Well, let's start in neighboring Japan, because very recently, just 2 days ago, the BBC introduced an interesting story evolving on efforts to recycle food waste back into food or feed through the process of fermentation. Japan, the world's fifth largest greenhouse gas emitter, has been struggling with food waste, as food accounts for some 40% of Japan's trash, with incineration resulting in significant greenhouse gas emissions. The founder of the Japan Food Ecology Center has found a solution to reducing that by turning human leftover food into high-quality pig feed by fermenting food waste. The unique method is receiving attention at the government level as well. Now, in the U.S., where the majority of food waste still ends up in landfills, the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration unveiled an initiative called the National Strategy for Reducing Food Loss and Waste and Recycling Organics. That was just a few months ago. The aim is to prevent food loss and food waste and increase the recycling rate for organic waste through consumer education campaigns, testing innovative waste reduction strategies, supporting organics recycling infrastructure, as well as growing the market for recycling recycled organic products. Now, moving to Brazil, the biggest country in South America, produces around 20 million tons of food waste a year. The Brazilian government is developing a new policy on the national level, including guidelines to reduce food waste and implement composting systems starting in 2025. So next year, which also happens to be the year the country hosts the UN Climate Change Conference, or COP30. And the European Union and its members are committed to have per capita food waste at the retail and consumer level by 2030. There have been continuous calls, and reportedly progress is underway at the EU to actually introduce the world's first legally binding targets to reduce food waste. So this is all based on what I found, but based on from my own experience in Germany, I just want to mention that when I used to live in Germany, I just threw away my food waste into the regular trash bin. But I found out that since a few years ago, there's been an encouragement for people to use the so-called Biotonne, so to actually now separate the trash. So I guess there's been efforts around the world.
Right, indeed. And Nicolas, you touched upon this earlier, but what was your experience with Korea's food waste recycling like while you were living here in the country? I mean, did you know, as Soa mentioned earlier, that eggshells and fish as well as chicken bones are part of daily waste and not food waste?
I learned that in Korea when I arrived. No, I was quite surprised, and it was some part of the getting used to when you arrive in a new country. I think the whole system was something I had to learn about. I didn't live in an apartment where I had the machine that allows to waste your waste and put it in a machine, etc. So I had to use the little yellow plastic bags. The fact that I had to pay for my food waste was also something quite new to me. But then, I also discovered the Korean culture and the banchan that creates also an important amount of food waste. And I realized slowly in my more than 3 years in Korea how things were working in the country and how pretty well organized they were. So that's why I also decided myself to do some of the coverage. I visited the facility. I went to see different restaurants to understand how also it works, because of course restaurants or big companies will create way more waste, and that might be where the biggest difference is made. If you have those big producers of waste that do it correctly, of course it's going to make a massive difference. But what also I understood was that there's this kind of individual mindsets of people to do things correctly on that field. I think it's probably because of 20 years or more of public incitation and the government putting programs, trying to push forward program and to raise the awareness on the matter. But yeah, I had my neighbors telling me, I'm not sure you did the right thing with the food waste. Eggshells shouldn't be there, and neighbors trying to explain how things work. So yeah, people were definitely motivated to do things right, and that was a massive difference for me comparing to what I knew in Europe. As Soa described, in France for the longest time we were only throwing food waste with the rest of the trash, the general trash, and that's still the case in many places.
Right, but earlier this year, the start of this year, that is France, Nicolas, France actually has made organic waste recycling mandatory now. Could you tell us a bit about the reason behind this regulation, how it works there?
So at first it was a European law. In the EU, how it works is that first the European Commission, the European Parliament passes a law, and then each nation have to implement it in their national law. So there were a few different laws, 2018, 2020, that pushed for countries to do it, but it became mandatory in France this 1st of January. Now it is those waste are handled by the municipality. So each city has to decide and offer to its citizen a solution for its food waste, which also creates a situation where it is handled differently in the territory. So depending on the willingness of a city to act on this as quickly as possible, the possibility offered to the citizen might be different. If I just take this example of where I'm staying at in Paris right now, It's very different in France because each building has a few different places to throw their waste, for the glass, for the plastic, and other divisions, but there's no option for food waste right now. In some cities, it might be in the streets. It's just a small place to throw the waste, but things are still ongoing. And so there's a willingness to do it. It's pretty late. But it's not done yet, and I think a lot of the mindsets have to change in France. It has to become a reflex. There's not a lot of knowledge of what goes where when it comes to food waste. If we go to the countryside, things are different because a lot of people have gardens, and they've kind of taken this habit to use their food waste in order to help their plant grow and put those organic waste to use. So this is not really counted as food waste in France. It's something it's impossible to put into statistics. How can we know what people do with their food waste in their own home if they just use it and don't throw it away? So it really depends on which city we're talking about. The implementation is still pretty fresh, and the willingness of the national government to act is not that strong in a way, because the European law has called for each European country to act on it a few years ago, and it took a while for it to pass in the French in the French Parliament, in the French law system. So yeah, there's we're at the beginning of the road here, so to speak, in terms of food waste.
Right. So still in the early stages then. Meanwhile, back here in the country, so despite the applause that Korea has been garnering for its efforts against food waste, I believe challenges do remain, right?
Right. While Korea appears to be the front runner in food waste management, it's not really doing well in creating less waste. The country creates around 5.5 million tons of food waste annually, with no big change having happened over the past 5 years. So despite the improved treatment of food waste, people have been throwing away more compared to decades ago. According to the Environment Ministry in 2019, around 70% of food waste was generated by households and small restaurants, that resulting in an economic loss of over 20 trillion won per year, of $15 billion, and food waste disposal costs amounting to around 860 billion won, or $647 million. Now, the Washington Post, in its coverage on Korea's food waste recycling, said the government was not able to persuade citizens to waste less food, despite people paying for the costs and their own efforts in having to sort and recycle their food. And speaking of sorting, another challenge that remains from the current food recycling system is that farmers are reluctant towards feeding their livestock from the food waste that's turned into feed, as there is no guarantee that no harmful things like a piece of plastic, metal, or a toothpick could have been mixed in the food waste. Meanwhile, what makes the reduction of food waste difficult is a change in lifestyle over the past years. People are eating out more, and they are using delivery services, and also families shrunk. Smaller sized households, including single-person households, lead to more leftovers.
Right. Meanwhile, Nicolas, you mentioned earlier that France's fight against food waste is still in its early stages, and that essentially we need to change the mindset of the people. That being said, do you suppose a campaign, perhaps a nationwide campaign to raise better awareness about the need to fight food waste, would be better in France right now?
I mean, they might try it. I'm not sure how well it would succeed in France, but I think definitely there's the first thing that would need to change is to make it available for everyone in a very easy way. Just to take the example of my mother, she's in her town of Lyon, and it's very easy to do it. So she's seen the place where she could throw it. So now she started doing it, taken interest into it, looked on the internet what goes where, and she's doing it. But if you don't have that offer available, especially in a major city, it's not something that you're going to go out of your way to do it. So probably a campaign should help, but also investments in infrastructure, trying to find innovative solutions. For instance, I think in Korea, the fact that you pay for your food waste entices you, first of all, to produce a little bit less food waste, but also to do things correctly. I'm not sure how well things could work in France on that front because of differences in the size of the country and the way the society works. But yeah, I think there needs to be some sort of changes. It will take some time, but the first steps really are, according to me, to just offer the possibility to the citizens to do things correctly as quick as possible. And because of the fact that it's a municipality prerogative, that it's the cities that have to decide, it depends highly. If you have a green mayor, for instance, things usually went quicker, but if it's a different political color, it might take more time. Then in Paris also it's very complex. The city is divided in districts, so some district might be quicker than others to do things. But I think slowly, if you see everybody around you doing it, and if everything is available for you to do it, things will naturally start changing. So yeah, I think that might be more efficient than probably a campaign that you will see on TV and that people might or not take seriously. But it's part of a global public policy where you have to, yes, do this work of sensibilization of the people, but also offer them the positive solution to sort their food waste as well as they can.
Right, for sure. And also, in a very sobering note, so a UN report back in March showed that the world wastes over 1 billion meals a day. Could you tell us a bit about that?
That really is the dilemma. While tons of food is going to waste every day, hundreds of millions of people are left starving. According to the latest UN Environment Program Food Waste Index Report 2024, published in late March, in 2022, 5.5 billion tons of food were available, compared to 5.3 billion tons in 2019. Now, at first glance, it might look like a positive development, but when it comes to food waste, the world wasted 1.05 billion tons, up from 931 million 3 years before, and that's 19% of food available to consumers. If we take a look at the sources of food waste by sector, households were responsible for around 60% of the total food waste in 2022. 28% was wasted at the food services level, and retail accounted for 12%. In its key findings, the UNEP report notes that while over 1 billion meals a day have been wasted in 2022, 783 million people were affected by hunger, and a third of the world dealt with food insecurity, stressing that food waste impacts the global economy and fuels climate change, natural loss, and pollution.
Right, some very grave numbers, if I may say so myself. All right, so as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today. And Nicolas, over in Paris, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you so much, Sunny.
Now, prevention, as most of us know, is better than cure. That being said, some point out the best way to fight food waste is to put less on your plate from the start. Thank you for watching.